Fake HOA cops find a widow for her husband's flag. Her Navy SEAL son fought back. This is the home of Margaret Maggie Thompson, a 65-year-old widow in Florida who flies this flag to honor her late husband, a Vietnam War veteran who gave his life for this country. But a group of fake HOA cops showed up, called the flag a violation, and fined her $3,000, threatening to rip it down. They didn't know Maggie's son, David, is a Navy SEAL with 15 years of elite training, and he wasn't about to let his father's memory be disrespected. This is HOA Karen Files, where we expose the bullies who target the brave. Ever had an HOA disrespect something sacred to you? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more. Let's dive into how David turned the tables on these scammers and fought for his mom. Margaret Maggie Thompson lived in a quaint bungalow in a quiet neighborhood in Pensacola, Florida, a place she'd called home for over 40 years. The house was small but well-loved, with a wraparound porch, a garden of wildflowers, and a flagpole in the front yard that had stood for decades. On that flagpole, Maggie flew 2 flags. The American flag, its stars and stripes a symbol of her husband's service, and a gold star flag below it, a tribute to his sacrifice. Her husband, Captain Robert Thompson, had been a Marine who died in Vietnam in 1971, leaving Maggie a widow at 27 with a newborn son, David. Robert had been her high school sweetheart, a kind man with a booming laugh and a fierce love for his country. "I'll be back before you know it," he'd told her before his last deployment, kissing her forehead as she held baby David in her arms. But he never came home. Killed in action during a firefight, his body returned to her in a flag-draped coffin. Maggie had raised David on her own, working 2 jobs as a nurse to provide for him, all while keeping Robert's memory alive. She'd tell David stories about his father, how he'd loved fishing on the Gulf, how he'd sing off-key to make her laugh, how he dreamed of teaching his son to play baseball. The flagpole was a sacred part of their home, a place where Maggie would stand every morning, raising the flag with care, her hands steady despite the arthritis that had crept into her joints. "This is for your dad," she'd say to David, her voice soft but firm. "He gave everything for us." David, now 45, had grown up under that flag, its shadow a constant reminder of the father he'd never known but loved deeply through his mother's stories. David had followed in his father's footsteps, joining the Navy at 18 and becoming a SEAL, one of the military's most elite operatives. He'd served 15 years, completing missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and classified operations around the globe, earning a Silver Star for his bravery under fire. Now retired, David lived in Virginia, working as a security consultant, but he visited his mother often, their bond unbreakable. Maggie was his rock, the woman who'd taught him resilience, honor, and the importance of family. "You're my hero, Mom," he'd tell her, hugging her tightly, her small frame dwarfed by his 6 feet 4 inches stature. On a sunny October morning, Maggie was in her garden, pruning her wildflowers, the flag snapping in the breeze above her. She wore a faded sundress and a straw hat, her hands moving with the care of someone who'd tended the same earth for decades. She was thinking about Robert, as she often did, when a white SUV pulled into her driveway, its doors emblazoned with a logo that read Gulf Breeze HOA. 3 people stepped out, 2 men and a woman, all wearing Navy vests with HOA compliance in bold letters. The leader, a man in his 40s named Stephen Carter, carried a clipboard, his expression stern as he approached Maggie. "Mrs. Thompson, your flagpole is in violation of Gulf Breeze HOA regulations," he said, handing her a letter stamped with a fake logo. "It's an unauthorized structure, and the gold star flag isn't allowed. You owe a $3,000 fine, payable in 48 hours, or we'll remove it." Maggie's heart sank, her hands trembling as she took the letter, her eyes filling with tears. "This flag is for my husband," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "He died for this country, and there's no HOA here. I've lived in this house for 40 years, and we've never had one." Stephen smirked, his eyes cold. "Gulf Breeze HOA was established last year," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're under our jurisdiction now. Pay the fine, or we'll be back to take it down." The woman, a 30-something named Jessica, snapped photos of the flagpole with her phone, while the other man, a burly guy named Mike, walked over to the flagpole and tugged at the rope, testing its stability, his disrespect evident in his careless movements. "This thing's an eyesore," he muttered, loud enough for Maggie to hear. Maggie's hands clenched into fists, her grief turning to anger. She thought of Robert, the man who'd given his life for their freedom, the man whose memory she'd honored every day for 53 years. "Get off my property," she said, her voice low but commanding, the kind of tone that had once calmed a hospital ward during a crisis. "Now." The group laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the quiet morning. "You've got 48 hours, lady," Stephen said, before they got back in their SUV and drove off, leaving Maggie standing in her yard, the letter crumpled in her hand. She walked to the flagpole, her steps heavy, and placed her hand on the cold metal, tears streaming down her face. "They're not touching your flag, Robert," she whispered, her voice a vow. "I won't let them." That evening, Maggie called David, her voice trembling as she told him what had happened. "They want to take down your father's flag," she said, her words breaking with emotion. "They fined me $3,000, David. I don't have that kind of money." David's jaw tightened, his military training kicking in as he listened, his mind already strategizing. "I'm coming home, Mom," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "No one disrespects Dad's memory. Or you. I'll handle this." He booked the next flight to Pensacola, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. The fake HOA cops had no idea who they were dealing with, a Navy SEAL who'd faced enemies far more dangerous than they could imagine. David Thompson arrived in Pensacola the next morning, his flight landing just as the sun rose over the Gulf. He was a towering figure, 6 feet 4 inches, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a scar across his left eyebrow from a mission in Afghanistan. He wore a black t-shirt, cargo pants, and combat boots, his movements precise and controlled, the kind of discipline that came from years of elite training. He drove straight to his mother's house, his heart aching as he saw her waiting on the porch, her small frame wrapped in a shawl, her eyes red from crying. "David," she said, her voice breaking as she ran to him, her arms wrapping around him in a tight hug. "I'm so glad you're here." David held her close, his jaw tight, his protective instincts in overdrive. "I've got you, Mom," he said, his voice steady. "They're not touching Dad's flag." Inside, Maggie showed David the letter from Gulf Breeze HOA, her hands trembling as she pointed out the $3,000 fine and the 48-hour deadline. David studied the letter with the same intensity he'd once used to analyze enemy intel, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the details: the cheap paper, the generic email address, compliance@gulfbreezehoa.org, mailtocompliance@gulfbreezehoa.org, the lack of a physical address. "This isn't a real HOA," he said, his voice low but certain. "I've seen scams like this before, shakedowns targeting vulnerable people. They picked the wrong house." He called a friend from his SEAL days, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Carter, who now worked in cybersecurity for a private firm in D.C. "Ryan, I need a deep dive on a fake HOA, Gulf Breeze HOA, David said, his tone clipped. "They're targeting my mom, and I want to know who's behind it." Ryan got to work, tracing the domain and financial records, while David set up a perimeter around the house, his military instincts kicking in. He installed small security cameras in the trees around the yard, their lenses trained on the flagpole, and set up a motion sensor to alert him if anyone approached. "If they come back, we'll catch them on tape," he told Maggie, his voice calm but firm. Maggie nodded, her trust in her son absolute, her heart swelling with pride as she watched him work. "You're so much like your father," she said, her voice soft. David smiled, his hand on her shoulder. "I learned from the best, both of you." Ryan called back that afternoon, his findings explosive. "Gulf Breeze HOA is a front," he said, his voice urgent. The domain was registered 3 months ago to a shell company, Coastal Ventures LLC, with a P.O. box in Miami. Coastal Ventures is linked to a developer, Sunshine Realty Group, known for buying up properties in Pensacola to build condos. They've been targeting older homeowners, trying to force them out with fake fines. "Your mom's house is on a prime lot, waterfront access, perfect for their next project." David's jaw tightened, his anger simmering. "They're trying to scare her into selling," he said, his voice a growl. "Not on my watch." David reached out to the local police, speaking with Officer Maria Lopez, a 35-year-old cop who'd served in the National Guard and respected veterans like Maggie. We've had complaints about fake HOAs in the area, Maria told him, her voice serious. But we need hard evidence to move on them. If you can catch them in the act, we'll be ready. David nodded, his plan taking shape. He also called a few of his SEAL buddies who lived nearby. Chief Petty Officer Jake Miller and Senior Chief Tom Hayes, both of whom were eager to help. "We're in," Jake said, his voice gruff. No one messes with a Gold Star family. The team arrived that evening, their presence a quiet show of force, their loyalty to David and his mother unwavering. The next morning, as the 48-hour deadline approached, David and his team were ready. Maggie stood on the porch, her hands clasped, her eyes on the flagpole, the American and Gold Star flags flying proudly. David stood beside her, his posture straight, his eyes scanning the street, his team positioned strategically around the property, Jake and Tom in plain clothes, blending into the neighborhood, their radios crackling with updates. White SUV approaching. Jake's voice came through David's earpiece. 3 occupants. It's them. David's jaw tightened, his training kicking in. He signaled to Maggie to stay on the porch, his voice calm but firm. "Stay here, Mom. I've got this." Stephen, Jessica, and Mike stepped out of the SUV, their vests on, their expressions smug. Stephen carried a megaphone, his voice booming as he approached the yard. "Time's up, Mrs. Thompson," he shouted. "Pay the $3,000, or we're taking that flagpole down, starting with that Gold Star flag." Mike grabbed a pair of bolt cutters, moving toward the flagpole as if to cut the rope, while Jessica started taking more photos, her camera flashing. David stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice low and dangerous, the kind of tone that had once stopped enemies in their tracks. "You're on camera," he said, pointing to the trees where the cameras were hidden. "And I know you're not a real HOA. Coastal Ventures, Sunshine Realty, I've got your whole operation figured out. You're scammers, and you're not touching my father's flag." Stephen's smirk faltered, his confidence shaken by David's intensity, the sheer size of the man towering over him. "You can't prove anything," he said, his voice less certain. That's when Officer Lopez and her team moved in, sirens blaring as 2 police cars surrounded the SUV. "Pensacola PD," Maria shouted, her badge out. "You're under arrest for extortion, vandalism, and impersonating an HOA." Maggie watched from the porch, her hands over her mouth, tears of relief streaming down her face as Stephen, Jessica, and Mike were handcuffed, their smug expressions replaced with panic. David stood by the flagpole, his arms crossed, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "You picked the wrong family to mess with," he said, his voice low. The cameras had captured everything, and David knew this was just the beginning of the fight. With Stephen, Jessica, and Mike in custody, Officer Maria Lopez and the Pensacola Police Department began unraveling the scam. The footage from David's cameras was damning, showing the group's threats and Mike's attempt to cut down the flagpole, a clear act of vandalism. Ryan Carter, David's cybersecurity friend, sent over his findings on Coastal Ventures LLC, linking it to Sunshine Realty Group, a developer with a history of aggressive land acquisition tactics. The police raided Coastal Ventures' P.O. box in Miami, uncovering a trove of evidence: fake HOA letters, lists of targeted properties, and financial records showing over $40,000 in extorted fines from homeowners across Pensacola. The operation was led by a man named Victor Russo, a 50-year-old with a rap sheet for fraud, who'd partnered with Sunshine Realty to clear land for a luxury condo project. David's confrontation with the fake HOA cops had been live-streamed by a neighbor, a teenager named Ethan who'd posted the video to TikTok with the caption, "Navy SEAL shuts down fake HOA trying to take down a Gold Star flag. #Justice for Maggie." The video went viral, racking up 6 million views in 24 hours, shared across platforms by veterans groups, military families, and patriotic organizations. Hashtags like #Justice for Maggie and #Protect the Flag trended nationwide, with comments flooding in. "This is outrageous. How dare they? David is a hero. We need to protect our Gold Star families." A local news station, where ABC3 picked up the story, interviewing Maggie and David in their front yard, the flagpole in the background. "This flag is for my husband, Robert," Maggie said, her voice steady but emotional. "He gave his life for this country. These scammers thought they could disrespect his memory. They were wrong." The viral attention brought more victims forward. Over 15 homeowners in Pensacola reported similar experiences with Gulf Breeze HOA, including a 70-year-old man named Mr. Carter, who'd paid $1,500 to avoid losing his shed, and a single mom who'd been harassed into selling her home after fake fines for her kids' trampoline. They kept coming back, the mom told Ware, her voice shaking. I had no choice. David's heart ached as he heard their stories, his resolve hardening. He hosted a meeting at his mother's house, inviting the victims to share their experiences, the flagpole a fitting backdrop for their collective fight. We're not just saving this flag, David told them, his voice strong. We're saving our homes, our memories, our community. The neighbors nodded, their faces a mix of anger and hope, ready to stand with David. Ryan's investigation uncovered a larger network. Sunshine Realty Group was part of a conglomerate, Suncoast Development, which had similar operations in 3 other states, Texas, South Carolina, and Alabama. This is bigger than Pensacola, Ryan told David over the phone, his voice urgent. Victor Russo is just a middleman. Suncoast is the real player. They've been doing this for years, targeting veterans, widows, anyone they think won't fight back. David's jaw tightened, his military mind already strategizing. Then we take it to the feds, he said. He called a contact at the FBI, a former SEAL teammate named Agent Chris Sullivan, who worked in the white-collar crime division. Chris, I've got a case for you, David said, sending over Ryan's files. These guys are preying on Gold Star families. They need to be stopped. Chris promised to escalate the case, coordinating with the Pensacola PD to build a federal indictment. The community support for Maggie grew stronger with every passing day. Veterans groups across Florida rallied, organizing a Stand for the Flag event in Maggie's front yard, where over 80 veterans showed up in uniform, saluting the flag and sharing stories of their own fallen comrades. The event was live-streamed on Facebook, drawing thousands of viewers, many of whom donated to a GoFundMe set up by Ethan to help Maggie with legal fees. The campaign raised $15,000, with donations from as far away as California and New York, where veterans who'd heard Maggie's story sent messages of support. My dad was a Gold Star dad, too, wrote a donor from New York. Thank you for fighting for them. Maggie used the money to hire a lawyer, ensuring the scammers would face justice. Back in the yard, Maggie stood by the flagpole, her hands on the rope, raising the flag as she did every morning. David stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. The neighbors gathered around, watching in silence, their presence a quiet show of support. This is for you, Robert, Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion, the flag reaching the top, the Gold Star flag below it glowing in the sunlight. The group shared a moment of silence, the flag above them waving gently in the breeze. David knew the fight wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. The legal battle against Coastal Ventures and Sunshine Realty Group moved swiftly, thanks to the evidence David and his team had gathered. The Pensacola PD, working with the FBI, raided Sunshine Realty's headquarters in Miami, seizing computers, financial records, and email chains that detailed the scam. The evidence was overwhelming. Victor Russo had been running the operation for 18 months, extorting over $80,000 from homeowners across Florida, with Sunshine Realty taking a cut of the profits to fund their condo project. The FBI expanded the investigation, uncovering Suncoast Development's operations in 3 other states, leading to a federal indictment for racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. David's story became a rallying cry for veterans and military families across the country. The viral TikTok video of the confrontation, combined with the Where ABC 3 News segment, caught the attention of national outlets like Fox News and CNN, with headlines like Navy SEAL defends Gold Star mom from fake HOA scam and veteran son fights for father's flag. David was invited to speak at a Veterans of Foreign Wars (VFW) convention in Orlando, where he shared his story with a crowd of 400 veterans. They thought they could disrespect my father's memory, he said, his voice echoing through the hall, the flagpole from his mother's yard projected on a screen behind him. But we showed them what happens when you mess with a Gold Star family. The audience gave him a standing ovation, many saluting as David stepped off the stage, his chest tight with emotion. Back in Pensacola, the community turned Maggie's flagpole into a symbol of resistance. Local veterans groups organized weekly visits, bringing their families to pay respects at the flagpole, the Gold Star flag becoming a pilgrimage site for those who'd lost loved ones in service. A group of high school students, inspired by David's story, started a Gold Star Stories project, interviewing Maggie and other local Gold Star families to document their stories, which they published in a book sold to raise money for veterans charities. David and Maggie taught us what honor looks like. One of the students, a 16-year-old named Sarah, told where during a follow-up story. We want to make sure no one forgets. The book raised $4,000, which Maggie donated to a local VFW post, helping them fund a scholarship for children of veterans. The trial against Victor Russo was a media frenzy, with David testifying as the key witness. He sat on the stand, his posture straight, his sealed trident pin on his jacket, his voice steady as he recounted the day of the confrontation. They threatened to tear down my father's flag, he said, his eyes locked on Victor, who sat at the defense table, his face pale. They disrespected the memory of a man who died for this country. I couldn't let that stand. The prosecution played the footage from David's cameras, the jury watching in silence as Mike approached the flagpole with bolt cutters, Stephen's threats booming through the megaphone. The evidence was irrefutable, and after a 2-day trial, the jury found Victor guilty on all counts, sentencing him to 10 years in prison. Stephen, Jessica, and Mike took plea deals, testifying against Victor in exchange for 3-year sentences each, with orders to pay restitution to the victims. Sunshine Realty settled a civil lawsuit for $2 million, with the money distributed among the victims. Maggie used her share to establish a small fund for Gold Star families in Pensacola, naming it the Robert Thompson Memorial Fund. I want to help others who've lost what I've lost, she said at the fund's launch, cutting the ribbon with a pair of ceremonial scissors, the flagpole in the background. The fund awarded its first grant, a $1,500 stipend, to a young widow whose husband had died in Afghanistan, helping her pay for her child's preschool. Thank you, Maggie, the widow said, hugging her, her eyes shining with gratitude. The aftermath of the trial had a ripple effect. Suncoast Development was hit with a $4 million fine, its assets seized to compensate victims across the country, and the FBI's investigation led to dozens of arrests in other states. Lawmakers in Florida introduced a bill called Thompson's Law, making it a felony to impersonate an HOA with intent to defraud, with specific protections for veterans and Gold Star families. David and Maggie Thompson showed us what's at stake, a state representative said at a press conference, holding up a photo of Maggie by the flagpole. We're fighting for every flag, every memory, every family out there. In the years that followed, Maggie's flagpole became a beacon of honor and resilience, not just for Pensacola, but for Gold Star families across the country. The flagpole grew in significance, with Maggie adding a small plaque at its base, engraved with Robert's name and the words, "In honor of Captain Robert Thompson, a hero remembered." Each raising of the flag was a ceremony, with Maggie and the community gathering to share stories, the American and Gold Star flags flying proudly, their colors a testament to the cost of freedom. The plaque became a place for reflection, where Gold Star families would visit, leaving flowers and notes, their grief met with understanding and support. David's story inspired a wave of activism among veterans groups, who used his fight to advocate for stronger protections against real estate scams targeting military families. The VFW launched a national campaign, Protect Our Flags, distributing flyers with tips on spotting fake HOAs and reporting fraud, with Maggie's flagpole as the centerpiece. David and Maggie Thompson fought for a Gold Star family's honor. The campaign's slogan read, "Now we fight for them, and for every veteran." The campaign led to new laws in 8 states, with Thompson's Law becoming a model for legislation nationwide. Advocacy groups for widows also joined the cause, using Maggie's story to highlight the vulnerability of older homeowners, ensuring that protections extended to all. The community around Maggie's house became a family, their bond forged in the fight to save the flag. Neighbors started a Gold Star Day, where they'd volunteer to maintain Maggie's garden, planting new wildflowers, cleaning the plaque, and raising the flag, their kids learning about Robert's sacrifice as they worked. The high school students who'd started the Gold Star Stories project expanded it, creating a podcast where they interviewed Gold Star families across Florida, their stories reaching thousands of listeners. Maggie and David showed us the power of standing up, Sarah said on the podcast's first episode, her voice clear and confident. They taught us to honor the past by fighting for the future. Maggie, now 68, continued to tend her garden, her hands slower, but her spirit as strong as ever. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, she held a special ceremony, inviting the community, David's SEAL team, Officer Lopez, and the families of other Gold Star members. The yard was packed, with over 150 people gathered, the flagpole at the center, the flags in full glory. They unveiled a new addition, a small bench beside the flagpole, a gift from the VFW, with a plaque that read, "In honor of Maggie and David Thompson, Defenders of Valor." "This flag isn't just mine," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion as she addressed the crowd. "It's ours, a place to remember, to heal, to fight for what's right. Thank you for standing with us." The crowd cheered, many saluting, the flags above them waving proudly. As the sun set, Maggie sat on the bench, a cup of tea in hand, watching the families gather around the flagpole, their voices a soft hum of gratitude. David sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his heart full. He thought about the day the fake HOA cops had tried to take the flag, the fear in his mother's voice, the anger in his chest, the uncertainty. But he also thought about what had come after, the strength of their community, the justice they'd won, the legacy they'd built. "We kept our promise, Dad," he whispered, looking at the plaque, the name of his father glowing in the fading light. The flagpole stood as a testament to Robert's sacrifice and to the power of a family that refused to let his memory be disrespected. Maggie Thompson's flagpole stands tall, a symbol of honor, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of a Gold Star family. 5 years ago, fake HOA cops thought they could tear down this sacred tribute to her late husband, a Vietnam War hero, fining her $3,000 and threatening her home. They didn't know her son, David, a Navy SEAL, would step in, expose their scam, and inspire Thompson's Law to protect veterans nationwide. Now, this flag flies forever, a legacy of justice and love. This is HOA Karen Files, where we shine a light on the brave who refuse to back down. Have you or someone you know been targeted by a fake HOA? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story. We'll see you soon, and let's keep honoring those who fight for us.